bit about one of my favourite things is the Loxodrome. So maybe I think that's one of the things that because it's the local area especially. Can you just tell us a bit about how the Loxodrome was discovered?
Yes, it's my favourite thing too. Um, it's a bit of a long story, actually, and not many people know this. We lived in Tehran for some years, and we travelled a lot because of my husband's company. And we bought books, and we got very interested in unidentified flying objects. And we used to sit out at night in Tehran on our terrace and look at the sky, which was really fun. And my husband, Tim, thought he saw something very, very fast going over towards the mountains one night. Anyway, when we came home, we joined the British Unidentified Flying Objects Association. And we were with them for some years, and eventually he became chairman. And one night, we went to a lecture on ley lines. It was interesting, but of course, Christian, I mustn't call him Tim, that's his nickname, Christian, being a scientist, didn't really go for ley lines. So he got out the Ordnance Survey map the next morning and tried to show that it couldn't be what, as they say. He did say, and I'm not sure how this works out, but he did say any 3 points are in a line. Well, of course they're not, because you can have a triangle, but it's something like that, he said. And then he found, to his surprise, that there were some sites, old sites, at equal distances from each other. So he started to explore that and found that, yes, this went on for some miles. Either a stone or a mound was marking a line, seemingly. And so he would say to me, well, if I'm right, there should be a stone here in this village or on this road. And he said, come on, let's go and have a look at it. So see if it's there. So we got in the car and went off to some hidden place, and sometimes we found the marker. Particularly the interesting and exciting one is the halfway marker at Short Grove Estate, outside the gates there. And that is exactly halfway, and it's the biggest of all of the stones. In the village they call it the leper stone, but of course it was used for that, to put food for the lepers, because it was already there. That's our opinion anyway. So we just started exploring what we called then Line A, which seemed to travel from Wandlebury, which is just up the road, to Hatfield Forest. And a bit further to Hatfield Broad Oak, we found another marker in the front garden of the Priory. So it was all very exciting. And that's what started us off.
So the line A is basically it's the Loxodrome. So
yes. Well, you see, we didn't know it was the Loxodrome then. We hadn't realised at the very beginning that each mark was at a slightly different angle. It wasn't dead straight. And Christian couldn't understand this for a long time because he said it's so accurate mathematically. I don't know how these can be off the line. And then he realised that it was following the curvature of the Earth.
So we were talking about the Loxodrome. Fascinates me as a subject because of the Wandlebury connection. I remember once when we went out some sites together.
Yes.
We
I took you round.
Yeah, that's right. And you believed that there was actually a stone at Wandlebury. Is that correct?
Yes.
So there was actually something there.
Yes, there was a stone at Wandlebury. Okay. It's flat and it's buried. But he did find it. Christian found it, which made a lot of sense of the whole thing, because that's presumably the starting point of this particular line of stones. But we do think it went right on through, we went up into Norfolk, checking mounds.
Okay, so kind of could go a lot further north and a lot further south as well. So that's
And don't forget the airport one that we found in Takeley.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, could you talk a bit about this other stone that got rediscovered?
Yes, now that's, I've forgotten a bit. I first saw something about this in the local paper. And it was to say that a huge stone had been found whilst they were digging out for the car park, the new car park. The archaeologists were quite excited about it. It was in a pit. It was shaped, and it was from the Bronze Age. So, well, I mean, the stone itself was much earlier than that, but they found a Bronze Age settlement there, and the people had obviously buried it, that stone, for some reason. We don't know quite how. They've considered what Bronze Age people did, and they've come up with some ideas, but nobody knows for sure why it was buried. I found it very exciting, and I followed it up in all directions, and I got hold of the archaeologist on the job, was Essex County Council. And I told him all about Line A and the Loxodrome. He wasn't completely won over, I must say, but I didn't expect him to be. To my mind, that is another stone on our line. And it is in a reasonable place. It was only, I think, half a kilometre off where it should have been. And it had obviously been dragged. They said that. So, to my mind, we filled in another gap on the line. And it has ended up in Takeley, the middle of Takeley village, with a little plaque, as you know. You've got the photograph to say that it was found on the airport site. And so it's very exciting when that happens. Each thing that happens, you feel confirms what you thought in the beginning.
So what was some of the other stuff? Because Christian and yourself did a whole thing about Bodmin Moor as well. Is that correct?
Yes. After this, you see, after finding this, we wondered who on earth could have done it, because Christian dated it to 2450 BC, give or take 100 years or so. That was earlier than we thought anybody could do such completely accurate mathematics and surveying. So to throw a little light on the subject, he went down to Cornwall. We took a flat there in Foy for 7 years, and worked a lot on Bodmin Moor, on the stone circles there, and on the megaliths, and the cairns, which are on top of the hills, or they were. Most of them are collapsed now. But there were huge cairns on top of the hills for the sighting from the middle of the stone circle. So this all added a lot of information. And we still kept on looking for the sages who could have done this.
So there's a lot of the discoveries that you guys were making were based upon sort of astronomical alignments, as though the people who built these sites were sort of master astronomers and geometers. They were actually, what do you feel the purpose of why they were doing this?
I don't know. The first reason that it might be would be for farming, to tell the people when to sow, when to reap, when to... They were surveying the country. That's the basic thing. Whether they were colonizing from somewhere else, I don't know, but I think that they covered the country with a complete survey.
Makes a lot of sense, doesn't it, really? I mean, it seems like that when you start look at all the sites around Britain, there seems to be a great survey, possibly around other parts of Europe and even the world, some people are suggesting. So some of the other places that were researched thoroughly was the whole kind of Sumerian kind of area, and Christian translated a lot of these tablets and did the Genius of the Few from that, really, wasn't it?
Yes.
So how did he first sort of just discover all the sites there in that area?
In which area?
The whole Sumeria, kind of Lebanon.
Yes. Well, we went on, I can't remember exactly what it was that brought this in. It was how he found it, I really don't remember. But there were those the codex. He did a lot of reading, and so did I. And we discovered people who could do this. And there was a lot of information in the Old Testament. But of course, the tablets, the translation of the tablets had been published, so anybody could read them. But he retranslated them. He took the translation, which I think was Barton had done, and improved on it, if I may say so, to make sense. He created from what was there a very exciting history of the Sumerian people and of certain so-called gods who came to help and to cultivate and to teach them how to live in a more sophisticated way. It says on one of them that before these gods arrived, the men drank out of ditches and were really behaving like animals. So there had been a change in their culture, and we had found then people who might have been able to do this wonderful astronomical surveying.
So really potentially it was from that area where the real kind of knowledge kind of spread from. And this is...
Well, yes. It sounds like it. You see, there are dates in the Old Testament about these people arriving. They descended on Mount Jarad when such and such a king was ruling. It turns out to be, we thought, 8,000 BC. But Edmonds put it back to 9,000, and Jericho too was 9,000 BC. So it's after the Ice Age. And it's possible that they were recultivating the earth and helping the people, any survivors, after one of the catastrophes that we've had so many of, including the Ice Age. You see, they planted a garden, they planted food, they planted fruit trees. They picked out certain of the native people and trained them in various ways, particularly Enoch. That's another book that would give us a lot of information, Book of Enoch. But we were picking up all we could find about that time then, knowing the time that they were working here, and it also turned out that the pyramids, people had been doing that kind of work with stones and watching the sky at that time. Then we just had to find who they were and where they came from. Well, we don't know where they came from originally. Now Edmund thinks that they were Sumerians colonizing here. My favorite theory is Atlantis, But there's another question: where did they come from Atlantis? Where did we all come from? This is the big question. So it's everything that happens is part of the story, and that's what makes life so interesting. And it's still happening. It won't lie down. You're here. So it's been a wonderful time, and I must say we had the feeling that that's what we were supposed to do in life. That was our work, and so the more we learned about it, we started to Christians started to write to give the world this knowledge, and we had 1 or 2 working holidays which didn't always turn out as they were supposed to. We went to Mauritius with a lot of books to do some research, which I still remember fondly. And it was gorgeous there. In the middle, we had a hurricane. It was awful. We were locked in our rooms for 48 hours. No, sorry, 24. It wasn't as bad as that. And that rather stopped us working for a while because we had to move hotels. But and we've been to the Azores 3 or 4 times, and each time we've had the most terrific adventures getting there, because in those days we had to go to one of the islands, Santa Maria, where the Americans had built a runway. And then the wind was blowing too hard, so we had to go on to Lisbon. And we spent 3 days in Lisbon waiting to get back to the Azores. So it's been a great, great adventure.
It's great about, we know there's evidence of a sophisticated ancient civilization on the planet, but the question still remains. I mean, who were these people? Where do you and Christian believe these people kind of came from? Or is it just was it like what you said, is it just like the ongoing quest to discover our origins?
Well, I think it is, until we get some more clues. In the beginning, I called them our people, because I was sure that nobody else in the world knew about them. But of course I was wrong. I discovered that an author called W.J. Perry had talked about them and had called them the archaic race or something like that, and he knew that they were where the mining was, for one thing. They mined, that they went in for big stones, megaliths, astronomically aligned, and they were obviously known to some people that there was an advanced civilization before ours. And where they came from, we had 3 options at that time to consider. This is what Christian thought. They could have come from somewhere else on Earth, and just arrived in the Lebanon. They could have been extraterrestrial, which is somewhere, another planet, out in space. Or they could have been astral beings. And he rather plumped for that. But I'm sitting on the fence. I'm not sure at all. And how can we know? We haven't got enough evidence, really, except that they were shining. They were shining people. But we think really that's because they were protecting their skin from the atmosphere. The sun would be very hot up there in summer, and the air would be rare. So they might need that kind of protection. They were known as the Shining Ones. So that is the most interesting thing. Who were they really? They were very human. They behaved like human beings. They weren't oddities. They weren't the sort of thing you see on Doctor Who. They fell in love. They ate meat. we know because they were ill after it once. They quarrelled, they fought. It's so really, it sounds as if they were from this earth, somewhere on this earth. But until we know more about other people, and if there are any other people in the universe, we can't make our minds up, can we? You see, the Phoenicians came round to Cornwall for the tin, didn't they? It's been an ongoing industry for thousands and thousands of years. And there's also, yes, the question of powdered gold, isn't there? Gold powder, which they used. That is another mystery, really.
There's also with the gold powder, the white powder gold.
White powder gold.
The pharaohs were known to have used it.
Yes.
And what it does, interestingly, because you talk about these people being shining beings, is that white powder gold, if you take it regularly, after a couple of weeks, you actually beam. You kind of beam with light almost. So that, to me, that could be a possible thing.
Yes.
Why they were mining gold, and could give some evidence of why they appeared to be shining, because it really, your energy field changes so much, you can almost see it, you know.
And it also extends life, doesn't it? Because it makes you so much more, well, I would say healthy, but operative. I think it was well known in ancient times, wasn't it? Because think of the alchemists.
Yeah.
They didn't know quite what they were doing. Some of them did, but they were trying to produce it, make it. And there was also that tree of life in the Garden of Eden. They planted something that extended their life span and ate the fruit. Now, we don't know what that was, do we? We've been led astray so much, and I'm sure that's what the Bible says is not right. And in any case, the serpents, these gods, or as we found out, they were known as the Anunnaki, they were known as serpents of wisdom. So it was, if it were a serpent, it was really one of the Anunnaki who seduced Eve. You see, I think, I don't know if I can give a plug to Lawrence Gardner on this. Lawrence Gardner is writing real, deep, interesting sense about all these old legends and myths. Myths are not always not true, but I'm talking about the ones that are badly translated, and the truth is there somewhere, but it's become very garbled during the centuries, and sometimes it's intentionally, apparently. But his books are eye-openers.
So with the serpent, because that gets mentioned a lot in the old text, that they were like serpent people. And why do you think the name serpent was used or given to them?
I don't know, except that they might have all had a sort of totem. It's the only thing I can think of. But it was used for wisdom. It was only the clever, knowledgeable people who were called serpents, and you could have 2 stripes or 1 stripe. You could be a high-up serpent or not so high. It was a grading. There was a great hierarchy in that civilization. I think I have read more about this. It may be a bit too there in the translation of it. You see, they wouldn't be called serpents. That's our language, unless we've adapted a word. But there was a serpent lady who had serpents all round her. It's come down from them. In other words, the feeling is that there was nothing here when they came, really, not much to talk about at all. And everything has come from that. Of course, there were primitive people, 8,000, I mean, we'd been going a long time, Cro-Magnon man, hadn't we? 40,000, wasn't it? So there must have been some kind of civilization, but as the Sumerians say on the tablets, they weren't living a respectable life.
It's also like the serpent symbolism, and the sort of and the myths of other cultures, such as the Inca, and the Quetzalcoatl in Mexico, and all around the world really, even the Tuatha De Danann in Ireland. It's all to do with serpents and the dragon and that serpent knowledge. So it seems like the source of it must have come from the whole Sumerian area.
Yes. There are the serpents around the medical staff. It's called a caduceus, isn't it? And there's another thing you have to remember here too. Think of all those strange creatures who are human with animal heads, or animal with human, I mean, a mixture of animals and humans. Now, I think they were playing about with genes. They were experimenting. I always think, and this is a bit silly perhaps, that a camel was a tryout for a horse. I don't know, but I think obviously it had to have those feet for the desert, the sand, but it was adapted to its surroundings. But they did have these weird creatures, and the Minotaur is another one which we don't know really much about. And I think that they were, I mean, up the road here we've got the gene research station, the genetic research station, and I hope they're not doing that, but I think these people, or some of them anyway, maybe a group of them, did some hybridization.
So that kind of fits in with other authors' theories that the Sumerians or the Anunnaki actually cloned or created human beings as a simpler version of themselves to mine gold all around the world. This is a theory that keeps popping up. I think Zacharias Sitchin's mentioned it. A few other people have come to that conclusion.
Well, that happened, and this is what the tablets say. I mean, this isn't gospel, but I'm sure it's more right than any other people's evidence. The Watchers were a group of the Anunnaki, of these so-called gods. They were building a road. I don't know if it was to do with the mining, it could be, but they rebelled. They came up to the boss's house, Enlil's house, and complained that he was making them work too hard and they weren't fitted for that sort of work, heavy labour. And so Enlil and Enki put their heads together and decided that they would create a race of men who would do the heavy work, which they did. And Ninlil, the wife of Enlil, being the prime mover, and Enki too, she knew how to create people in a test tube, actually, in vitro. And that apparently is what she did. 6 boys and 6 girls. And that is where Adam and Eve come in. And how they grew them up quickly, I mean, they must have had growth hormone, I don't know, but she provided a heavier type of man to do the labour, which the Watchers refused to do. So that story is actually on the tablet.
Is that? Did it say where that was based? Was that experiments, were they being done in Sumeria, or did they say it was on a different land, a different country? Do you know?
It was in Sumeria. It was in Karsak, their base. She had a lab there. She was a biologist, and a horticulturalist. But she took local women to be, what do you call them now? surrogate mothers. And they tested the watchers to see which one they think would have the best genes for this process. And then they were fertilized in the test tube, and she and Lil acted as midwife when the babies were born. 12 women, 12 babies. It's the story on the tablet. I mean, we've got so used to it now. They could create a new race, which we are just about to be able to do, really. I mean, it's dangerous, but we have got that far, haven't we?
So it's almost like the Sumerians, potentially, way back, and we're talking like roughly 10,000 years ago or 12,000 years ago. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yeah, around that kind of time. So so humans, as we know it, like ourselves, we're just ancestors of test tube Sumerian babies as such. So the entire human race is now just that, and the higher culture that created us kind of disappeared.
We don't know. Somebody asked me after a talk, where are the Anunnaki now? Which is a good question. And Edmund said, we are the Anunnaki, which is exactly what you said. They are our ancestors. Well, we were hoping that they were keeping an eye on us still, but they may have another base somewhere and come. I mean, it's limitless, really. There's no limit to what might be happening. But we have, if that is true, we have inherited their genes, haven't we? And apparently we all come from about 5 women, isn't it? In the past. But there's more to it than that. That was only the recent hybridization. We think it's possible that they took part in the Cro-Magnon man hybridization, that he grew out of Neanderthal, and that was 40,000 BC. So they may have been around all that time. Well, the Anunnaki.
Yeah, there is evidence that some of the mines they've discovered around the world are at least 40,000 years old.
Really?
Yeah, this is some of the stuff that in South Africa.
However gosh, isn't it amazing? They do carbon dating.
I think so, yeah.
Something like that. Well, they might have come here for the mining. That may be the real reason, especially the gold, presumably. But I mean, it's all. I'm hoping for more information, so that we can think of it again, think about it again. I should think the people who are most likely to help are the genetic people, the people working on the genes, because they can tell by doing the DNA tests where people have come from originally, which race they have belonged to anyway. But you would think that, well, if we are descended from the Anunnaki, then those would be the Anunnaki's genes, wouldn't they? So there wouldn't be anything different to find. We've got them. But where, as you say, but there were people here when they first came, must have been primitive people. Even if it was 100,000 BC, there'd have been something here. We don't know how that started at all, do we? Early life, ancient life. I mean, listen to Dawkins, he's very plausible that it just happened because of a soupy sort of thing with life in it, a connection between atoms, cells, really. But I look at a bird and I think that's incredible. It looks as if it's been designed on a painting or a draft board. I don't know. I can see that the information is in the genes and in the cells, but where did that information come from before that? That's the interesting thing, isn't it?
It's fascinating.
Some people don't mind. Some people think it's a waste of time
I know.
worry about it.
know,
I'm not worrying about it. It just makes life fascinating.
Yeah. If we just go back a bit to where we were earlier,
Yes.
to do with Christian sort of discoveries, because I believe he was looking, when he was working out in the Middle East, he was famous because he discovered one of the main ziggurats there, and this is what triggered some of his research. So were you there with him at that time? Or?
No. He wasn't actually famous. He was a young geologist, only 22, and he was working under a senior geologist called Victor Boileau they called him. And they climbed a mound, a huge mound, one morning to watch the sunrise. They were on survey, southern Persia. And I think they kicked against a brick. And Boileau noticed that it had cuneiform writing on it. So he picked it up and, very interested, he actually galloped on his horse to the French archaeologists who were working some miles away. So many kilometres there and so many kilometres back he went. And he gave them this brick, cuneiform brick. So, of course, eventually they excavated and they found that beautiful building. It has been a bit reconstituted. It's lovely, but it was just a mound of rubble, huge mound of rubble. And the French archaeologist who was out there when I went with Christian, which was much later, I went out with him in 1965, 66. The archaeologist then actually wound up the excavation by publishing great big tomes on it, which I've got in the study, and he signed them to the founder of the ziggurat. But in fact, Tim said, no, it wasn't me. It was Boileau who found it, who realised. But it gave him the thrill, you see, and it gave him, I think, the interest in what had been left behind from ancient times. But we didn't think much about it after that. I mean, we were working in an industry, and it didn't really surface until the late 60s. We retired from there in 1970. But it was unidentified flying objects that caught our imagination. We did some interviews here in this country of people who'd seen them. And don't say we believed in them or we didn't believe in them. We were curious. And it all sort of added to the mystery of life.
So the first bit of research really was the Loxodrome then, I guess.
Yes,
yes.
yes.
Because you were looking for ley lines as such, or lays,
yes.
And realised there's several stones and mounds, sites in this area.
They were marked on the map, you see, certain ones. I can't remember exactly which they were. Some details, unfortunately, are hazy. But I think my story is right about how we discovered that, about the lecture in London. And the Ordnance Survey map, certainly. And of course, he was a surveyor, really, as well as a geologist. You have to survey, or you did have to, I think things are changing now, to find the most suitable terrain for oil. And so he had all the equipment, and he followed this up as a surveyor.
And did you, when these sites were first discovered, they got published in 1976, I believe, in the booklet.
Yes.
And then a year later, or 2 years later, then it became quite popular because it appeared in the Sunday Observer magazine. Is that correct? Can you talk a bit about that?
Telegraph.
In the Telegraph, yeah.
Yes. Can't think now how we got that. Somebody must have read the thing he published. I don't remember that, but I do remember that the Daily Telegraph, or the Saturday, I think it was, Saturday or Sunday Telegraph, rang up and said, would he give an interview on it? So we had a very lively journalist here, and a cameraman. That was in Thaxted, when we lived in Thaxted. And we spent the whole of one day with them, or they spent it with us, taking them around and talking about it. And there was a very good article after that. He wrote it up extremely accurately about, we told him what we'd discovered and how we'd discovered it. We took him to see some of the stones, and that was 1978, I think, and a lot of people read that, actually. But the photographs they took, oh, goodness me, hundreds. I've still got a copy or two of that, and it's been very useful. I've been able to send it to people like the National Trust, because I was fighting Stanstow's runway, and that, to show them what was going on in the area. It mustn't be dug up. So yes, that was an exciting time too.
So Christian was working a lot with the ideas of Alexander Thom, and he was
Yes.
working with the archaeoastronomy and the different geometries, and he discovered. I mean, could you, if you can you sort of? He eventually came up with this idea that it wasn't a straight line. It was actually very slightly curved, which kind of going around on the surface, just like curvature on the surface, which equal the same as the curvature of the Earth or something.
Yes. Well, each marker was 2 or 3 degrees off the straight, and he realised that that's what they were doing. They were adjusting for the curvature of the Earth, so that each marker faced true north. And of course, a Loxodrome is what ships travel by at sea. They travel on a Loxodrome because they're going with the curvature of the Earth. So that's the name it was given. And it was amazing to think that whoever had done that, walked across this country in 2450 BC, was so mathematically knowledgeable and sophisticated. It was pretty well a perfect survey between 2 points and more. But there's another question: why did they do it? Which you haven't asked me yet. So it's possible that you take a right-angled triangle, apparently, at one point, at one end, and you do another at the other end, and you can do a right-angled triangle each step along the way. And if you take the difference, that gives you something. The angle to the sun, isn't it?
Yeah.
What's it called? It's got a name. Coordinate? I think so. Anyway, they could have been simply doing an astronomical survey, or they could have been doing it for the sake of the farming, or, and I don't think this is true of England, but Edmund has got the idea that all this was done to check the sky, in the sense that we have been hit a lot by comets and cometary dust and foreign objects, put it like that. And they had some knowledge about this, like the Mexicans who know that in 2012 something should be happening. So they could have been on the lookout for trouble. But so he thinks they built the pyramids and Baalbek as a sort of air raid shelter, if you like, for survival. But as I say, here I don't know. So it's just there, hidden, nobody knows. And I used to go up and touch a stone and say, oh, you've been here a long time. Nobody knows, they're just old stones. Well, you know that.
There's also Ring Hill in Littlebury.
Yes.
Ring Hill. If you light a beacon before the trees were planted,
yes.
If you light a beacon on Wandlebury, you can see it from Ring Hill, vice versa. So it could have been, it could have been used for surveying as well, and just to kind of have kind of beacons lit up through the night. And it's also an old tradition, isn't it, to like go from hill to hill, lighting beacons across the landscape. A bit like the only modern thing that they have left of that really is bonfire night, where bonfires all around the country. You know? So it could have been something to do with that.
I'm sure they must be connected, Wandlebury and Littlebury, mustn't they?
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Littlebury's on the line, dead on the line. They used to light bonfires as a warning for invasion, didn't they, along the south coast? But I don't know that they would have had electric light. They would light a fire. But I think they had electric light at Cossack and flying machines of some kind. Their base in Lebanon. So whether these... There's a long time span between 8,000 or 9,000 BC and 2,450. Whether these were the same group of people or descendants or a different group, we don't know, do we? But they did live a long time. I do think that happened.
Isn't there stories of asteroids or comets hitting the Earth around 2,500, 3,000 BC? I understand there's theories that there were like 7 cometary hits, a lot of them in the oceans around that time, and previously it happened around 10,000 BC. With the so-called Noah's flood, destruction of Atlantis.
Oh, there you are. They were.
And a smaller one happened just before the megalithic kind of era, and hence a lot of people are now thinking, which I'm sure Christian and yourself have considered, is that cataclysm triggered a whole global effort to build ancient sites, the megalithic sites, for like calendars, for trying to measure when the next one's coming.
Yes.
Things like this. So there could be some kind of connection there, perhaps.
It's not very romantic, is it? It's hard, down-to-earth stuff. Or down-to-earth, I mean, it's quite frightening if you let yourself think about it. But nowadays they have clever ideas about stopping anything on the way, don't they? They think they can dissolve a bit of comet before it gets to us.
Let's hope so.
And let's hope that the space program is finding out a bit more about it. Have they ever seen anything flying about? Except UFOs?
Well, it's a bit worrying, isn't it? Because it's like,
they wouldn't tell us.
Yeah. They just get on their spaceships and go and colonise Mars. And
well, you see, I have I have a feeling deep down that we've had to do that. We've had to move from planet to planet. You see, we're ruining this, aren't we, gradually? And in the past, we might, the human race to survive might have had to get into spaceships and go somewhere else. Where we'd go, I don't know. But they're trying to make Mars habitable now. They're putting water on it and plant trees. You see, they could build up an ecosystem, like what do they call it in Cornwall? Eden. There you are. We're back to square one. Yes.
The Mars Eden Project.
The Eden Project. The Mars Eden Project, yes, yes. Well, I mean, there's no limit to our cleverness if we have to be clever. I'm sure we'll think of something.
Okay, well, I think we're kind of getting there, actually. We've got quite a lot of good material. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about?
I don't think so. I was just about to say I think that's about enough.